At 5:00 a.m. in Ukraine's eastern Zaporizhia region, the still morning was shattered without warning. A Russian armored spearhead of 50 main battle tanks and 70 armored personnel carriers roared out of the captured airfield near Melitopol, pushing toward a forward base deep inside Ukrainian territory. The 2.1-mile convoy carried over 600 troops, thousands of pounds of ammunition, and fuel for a 10-day offensive toward Dnipro. This wasn't just an attack. It was a strategic thrust threatening millions. In seconds, the calm would shatter, and what followed would become a lesson in modern warfare, deep beneath the streets of Dnipro. In a reinforced underground command center, Ukraine's Southern Defense Command was already in motion minutes earlier, satellite imagery, and forward UAV feeds had confirmed the nightmare. Taking shape, a 2.1-mile Russian armored convoy, moving in tight formation toward a captured forward base. General Mykola Havlenko, the sector commander, studied the live projection. Over 100 armored vehicles flanked by supply trucks, grinding forward at nearly 18 miles per hour. If they reached the base, the position could become an iron fortress, able to launch strikes into 3 Ukrainian regions. Within hours, there was no debate. "Hit them now, don't let them dig in," Havlenko ordered, his voice cutting through the dimly lit room. Officers sprang into action, linking secure channels across air. Ground and artillery units, the plan would unfold in tightly timed phases. First, reconnaissance drones would map every tank, every APC, and every fuel truck. Next, swarms of low cost suicide drones would shatter the convoy's formation and sow chaos before the enemy could deploy, then airborne. Flying mines would punish any defensive gunfire. After that lightning-fast, motorcycle assault teams would slice through the flanks and rear finally. Mechanized infantry would close the noose, ensuring no one escaped. Every minute mattered. The convoy was a steel serpent, but in the war room its fate was already being scripted, a trap designed to collapse in perfect sequence. The counterattack clock had started ticking. From the moment General Havlenko gave the order, the first phase moved into play. Out on improvised airstrips hidden among wheat fields, 20 low-altitude reconnaissance UAVs, each no bigger than a dining room table, lifted into the early morning haze. Their electric motors hummed softly, barely louder than the wind through the grass, as they skimmed just 15 to 20 feet above the ground. To stay beneath Russian radar sweeps, each drone carried a high-resolution thermal optic and an encrypted live-feed transmitter streaming real-time imagery straight back to the underground command center. On the big wall display, the convoy's shape began to take form. Dark thermal silhouettes of tanks and armored personnel carriers snaking along the asphalt. Flanked by fuel trucks and ammo haulers, the scale was staggering. More than 2 miles of steel and firepower. Grinding forward at a steady 18 miles per hour, operators began tagging targets with practice. Precision red markers flashed over the lead command. Vehicle, a specially modified T-90M, fitted with extra communications gear, blue icons highlighted fuel carriers, each hauling nearly 4,800 gallons of diesel, enough to keep the offensive alive for days. Yellow circles marked mobile artillery batteries. Tucked among the BMP-3 their 100mm guns, ready to pound Ukrainian positions once in range, inside the command center. The atmosphere tightened like a drawn bowstring. Officers spoke in clipped tones, relaying grid coordinates to strike units. Preparing the next phase on one side of the room, a young UAV operator adjusted a joystick, locking a drone's camera onto a moving supply truck. On another, a lieutenant cross-checked target IDs against intercepted radio chatter. Every icon on the screen represented a decision: what to hit first, what to cripple, what to leave for follow-up forces, and with each passing minute, the convoy rolled closer to the forward base. Havlenko leaned over the main console, eyes fixed on the growing lattice of target markers. "We don't get a second chance," he said quietly when we hit. "It has to count above the fields." The 20 drones held their silent vigil, weaving between tree lines and low ridges. The steel serpent was fully exposed now, every link in its armored body mapped in crisp detail. In the war room, the trap was tightening. Phase 2 was about to be unleashed from the moment. The last recon drone finished mapping the convoy. The strike order went out less than 4 minutes later. 80 suicide drones, each roughly the size of a motorcycle, rose from hidden launch racks along the tree lines north of the Russian column. Flying low and fast, they skimmed across the fields. At nearly 90 miles per hour, hugging the terrain at barely 15 feet. To stay invisible to enemy radar, they weren't factory-built NATO hardware. Most had been assembled in hidden workshops for under $4,000 apiece, but each carried a 26-pound shaped charge warhead, designed to burn through more than 2 feet of rolled armor steel at 6:00 a.m. The Russian forward gunners finally spotted them. A flicker of movement against the wheat, then dozens of dark shapes, racing in defensive fire, erupted in a frenzy. 30mm autocannon burst from BMP-3 second, belts of 7.62mm tracers from mounted PKMs, and the dull thump of grenades launched blindly toward the horizon. But the swarm was too large and too close. The first drone slammed into the lead BMP-3, detonating with a white-hot flash. The blast flipped the 18-ton vehicle onto its side. Blocking half the road, 3 more drones dove into a cluster of Ural trucks. Hauling over 5,000 mortar rounds, the resulting fireball sent a rolling shockwave through a 650-foot stretch of the column, shredding tires, shearing off armor plating, and killing or wounding dozens of troops in seconds. Then came Phase 240 flying mines, modified quadcopters each carrying a 21-pound TM, 62 anti-tank mines strapped beneath its frame. They approached at a slow crawl, just 20 miles per hour, deliberately baiting Russian gunners the moment a bullet struck the mine casing. The pressure fuse triggered, producing an airburst that rained razor-sharp shrapnel across a 100-foot radius. One detonation wiped out an entire rifle platoon, dug into roadside cover another, shredded a squad of RPG gunners before they could reload. The psychological effect was immediate. Tank crews abandoned their vehicles. Convinced they were about to be targeted by artillery, APC drivers swerved into irrigation ditches or reversed blindly into other vehicles. Supply trucks jackknifed across the road, spilling crates of ammunition into the dust from the Ukrainian command center. The live thermal feeds told the story. The steel serpent had broken. Smoke and fire dotted the convoy's length. Vehicles sat burning in place, and the once steady advance had ground to a chaotic halt. Phase 1 of the strike had done its job. The enemy was disoriented, bleeding, and scattered. Now the battlefield was primed for the next blow. The roar of engines was already rising from the south. The echoes of the drone strikes were still rolling across the fields, when a new, sharper sound cut through the smoke. The high-pitched scream of motorcycle engines from behind a low earthen ridge. 200 armed dirt bikes burst into view, fanning out across the open ground. Like a flood of steel and dust, each bike carried 2 soldiers, a driver focused solely on speed and maneuvering, and a gunner armed with either an RPG-26, a wire-guided anti-tank missile, or a laser-guided system, capable of burning through over 30 inches of armor. They split instantly into 3 attack wings. The southern wing, 80 bikes charged straight down the smoke-covered flank, weaving between burning BMP-3 second and jackknife supply trucks. The northern wing's 60 bikes swung wide, using tree lines to mask their approach, before slicing in toward the convoy's exposed side, the rear wing. Also, 60 bikes accelerated hard to cut off any retreat, their tires throwing up rooster tails of dirt as they closed in behind the trapped Russian vehicles. Within seconds, the southern wing struck first. At less than 300 yards, a Ukrainian gunner sent a rocket straight into the engine block of a T-90 MEM. The hit triggered its fuel cell, and the 12-ton turret lifted clear off the chassis. Before crashing upside down onto the road, 2 more tanks were disabled in the next minute, their crews scrambling for cover only to be driven back by withering. Small arms fire from advancing bikes, the northern wing met heavier resistance. Autocannons from surviving BMP-3 second chewed through the dirt, killing 4 riders, but the Ukrainians hit back hard. 5 APCs were knocked out in under 3 minutes, one of them by an RPG fired from barely 75 feet away. The rear wing delivered the killing blow. 2 fuel trucks, each hauling nearly 4,800 gallons of diesel, went up in a pair of tandem missile strikes. The explosion sent a fireball more than 150 feet into the air, igniting nearby cargo trucks loaded with mortar rounds, and creating a chain reaction of secondary blasts. In less than 15 minutes, the convoy's cohesion was gone. The once disciplined column was now a series of isolated, burning wrecks hemmed in by fast-moving bikes that refused to give the enemy room to breathe. The trap had snapped shut, and the next phase, full encirclement, was already on its way. The battlefield was now a patchwork of burning armor, shattered trucks, and columns of black smoke rising into the morning sky. As the last motorcycle squads darted between wrecks, tightening their grip on the crippled convoy, a new force entered the fight from the east. 3 mechanized infantry platoons, over 120 Ukrainian soldiers, riding in armored personnel carriers, pushed forward in a slow, deliberate advance. Using the hulks of destroyed Russian BMPs and T-92nd as improvised cover, they leapfrogged from wreck to wreck, rifles leveled, every movement calculated to seal the trap. The motorcycle wings didn't let up, still maneuvering at speed. They began tightening the encirclement, drawing the noose from a wide 0.9-mile perimeter down to barely 1,600 feet, engines revved and tires skidded, as they wove between immobilized vehicles, cutting off gaps, and pushing any surviving Russian units. Toward the center, the coordination was surgical. Every opening the infantry left. The bikes closed, and every gap the bikes missed, the infantry filled with firepower.